Hello students, thank you for coming back to my channel. Today we will study the second chapter of Vista's supplementary textbook of class 12. The title of the chapter is The Tiger King by Kalki. The story The Tiger King is a satire on the pride and stubbornness of those in power. The writer takes us to the days of autocratic and eccentric kings. These kings lived under the thumb rule of British, and hence they fear them. Most of the time, the rulers were not interested in serving the people and working for the welfare of the public. Instead, they spent their time in foolish pursuits. They flouted all laws and bent them to suit their selfish interests. The Maharaja of Pratibandhapuram tried to belie what was written in his fate. The chief astrologer had predicted that the cause of his death would be a tiger. So let us now learn something about the author. The author Ramaswamy Krishnamurthy, better known by his pen name Kalki, was an Indian writer, journalist, poet, critic, and an Indian independence activist. He was named after Kalki, the 10th and last avatar of the Hindu god Vishnu. His prodigious literary output included more than 100 short stories, nearly 20 novels and novelettes, besides hundreds of articles on a variety of subjects and innumerable reviews of music concerts, dance recitals, dramas, and films. Most of his short stories, serials, novels, and historical romances turned out to be masterpieces. So what is the story actually about? Kalki will take his readers to the days of autocratic and eccentric kings. These kings lived under the thumb rule of the Britishers and hence they feared them. In order to make the story more mysterious, Kalki has also added the element of supernatural in it. The haughty king disapproved the prophecy made by the astrologer about his death, but his death from the wooden tiger, which happens to be the 100th tiger, approved it. The story is actually a satire on the conceit of those in power. Most of the time, the rulers were not interested in serving the people or work or doing any welfare for the public. Instead, what did they do? They spent time on foolish pursuits. Even the coteries who surrounded these power centers are interested in taking advantage of the proximity of their own welfare. This is a story about transience of life, of power, and it reverberates to the maxim, too many slips between the cup and the lip. Now let us look at the text. The text begins with a detailed account of the titles that this king had won. And these are the titles, if you look at them and read the acronyms, they sound as mad or crack. This is a deliberate intention, deliberately written by the author to invoke some kind of curiosity and to make fun of this Tiger King. The astrologers had given him such a long name because they had predicted that Jilani Jang Bahadur would grow up to become a valiant warrior. But one day the tiger would actually have to die. The chief astrologer said that the Maharaja was born in the hour of the bull and the bull and tiger were enemies, therefore his death would come from the tiger. On hearing this, the Maharaja went on killing several tigers and justified this act as a self-defense. That's why he received such a long name. So now let's go to the next page of this chapter. In this chapter, one thing that has to be kept in mind all the time is that the whole story is going to revolve around the fact that this king from day one is going to spend his entire lifetime in killing tigers. He is going to ignore his duties and responsibilities as a king. Now, there is an element of humor, there's an element of irony and satire as well. There are certain things that have to be kept in mind when we are talking about the king's role, and we are talking about how the minions and how the courtmen behave in his presence. So I want you to keep in mind that we will be in between as the story proceeds. We will also be talking about what are the points of irony, what is the satire, and what are the points of humor as well. You can see them as we progress with the story. On the previous page, the author has been able to build up the curiosity of the reader to know more about the Tiger King. But at this point, he suddenly informs the reader that the Tiger King is dead and there is no possibility to meet him because he's already reached the final abode of all living creatures, which is actually heaven. So this is just a style of writing, and he's been able to do that, bring out a rise in the expectations of the reader, and then suddenly kill that expectation. So the king is born, and once the king is born, the astrologer makes a prediction that the Tiger King will actually one day have to die. This is a ridiculous prediction, and since this is fiction, children, this 10-day-old child actually suddenly speaks up and he says that, "Oh, wise prophets, it is I who speak," because everybody is very curious to know from where did that uh, sound come from, because he says that oh, wise prophets, and they don't can't really recognize from where did that sound come from, and then they see that it is actually that 10-day-old king who has spoken, and he kind of ridicules the chief astrologer, and he says that all those who are born will one day have to die. We don't need your predicaments to know about that. There would be some sense if you could tell us the manner in which I would die. And then the chief astrologer takes it as a challenge, and I don't know whether he actually had that prophecy. And he makes an announcement that a very grand announcement that the baby, the Tiger King, was born in the hour of the bull. And the bull and the tiger are enemies, and therefore death comes from the tiger, he explained. So, what actually did he prophesize? He prophesies that it's the tiger who's going to be responsible for the death of the king. And what gave the astrologers the greatest surprise of their life while they were studying the horoscope of the prince king? Uh, it was that the greatest surprise of their life was that a 10-day-old baby suddenly spoke up and addressed them all, and asked about the manner of his death. And when the chief astrologer told him that a tiger would be the cause of his death, the baby again he was very angry, and with great arrogance he retorted and said, "Let the tigers beware." So this was something that really confused the astrologers, and they were taken by surprise. So here he says that let the tigers beware. Now the second part of the story is going to talk about how he was brought up, how the king was brought up. And this is that time when India was a colony of the East India Company and the Britishers were ruling the country. And at that time, the kings were actually just rubber puppets, and actually the control of the kingdom was in the hands of the Britishers. So these kings were really, the kingdoms and the kings and the princes, they were really, really fascinated by the British style of being brought up. So kings and queens and princes of that time were usually so infatuated by the way the Britishers uh, were brought up, that they all brought up their own children in that same manner. So the king here, when he was young, he was brought up like any other British person, and the boy drank the milk of an English cow, was brought up by an English nanny, tutored in English by an Englishman, saw nothing but English films, exactly as the crown princes of all other Indian states did. Now, when he was young, the kingdom was being taken care of by the court of wards. And the court of wards were actually, it's actually a legal body that was created by the East India Company, and its purpose was to protect the heirs and their estates when the heir was deemed to be minor and therefore incapable of acting independently. So it was like they were the caretakers till the king didn't become that mature enough to be actually a king in control. So while he was being brought up, there was a specific intention not to allow him to get to know about the prophecy that tigers will kill him. It was deliberate that this prophecy should not reach the king's ears, but somehow it did. And ultimately, when that happened, he wanted to disprove the astrologer. Now here we'll come to the point of the conceit of those in power. This is one of the major portions of the chapter, themes of the chapter, because this refers to those who are in power actually do not really bother about others, and they rule according to their own whims and fancy, and they do not even want anybody to object to whatever they want to pursue. So here you'll see that now he is going to kill a tiger, and he's going to flaunt it in front of the astrologer. And now he asks him that, see, I have killed a tiger, so what do you say about your prophecy? And here the astrologer, he had to save his skin. And what does he say? He says that it's okay that you've killed one tiger, but you may kill 99 tigers, but exactly whom do you have to fear is the 100th tiger. The 100th tiger is going to be the one who is going to be responsible for your death. So this was the warning that he gave. This was the warning that the astrologer gave to the Tiger King when he killed the first tiger. And whether this prediction came out to be true or not, we'll get to know by the end of the chapter. But I'm assuming you might have read the chapter once, so I'll answer this at this point, because he actually, the two ways of answering it. I think so we should deal with it later onwards. So let that this question still remain unanswered. So going to the next page here, so he challenges the king here. He challenges the astrologer and says, what if I kill 100 tigers? And he says that the astrologer says, I'll tear up all my books and on astrology, and I'll set fire to them. And then he wants more out of that. And he says, and I'll cut off my tuft. Tuft refers to that strand of hair actually on his head, and crop my hair short. I'll be an insurance agent. I'll change my profession. So that's the claim that the astrologer makes, and it seems as if he's very, very sure that this is the prophecy that the king has to actually fear the 100 tiger. Now, in the third part of the chapter, this particular line, from that day onwards, it was celebration time for all the tigers inhabiting Pratibandhapuram. Because what had happened was a state ban had been issued that tigers will be hunt only by the king and nobody else. Now, why was it celebration time for the tigers? Because the tigers thought that now, when there are less number of people who are going to be allowed to kill tigers and only the king is going to kill the tiger, it means that there's a possibility less number of tigers will be killed. But little did they know that their head is going to be very near, because the king is going to go on a killing spree. Now, this also shows conceit of those in power. Now, see, he has misused his power. He has gone to that extent that if anybody dares to throw as much as a stone even on a tiger, all his wealth and property would be confiscated. It was definitely celebration time for all the tigers inhabiting Pratibandhapuram, but at the same time, this is also a reflection of the conceit of those in power. So here he's totally misusing his power. I hope you understand this, children.